Hi everyone, yeah, welcome back. Good to see you again. You're looking well. Get yourself a drink and a seat up front. We're going to get started. Because yes, there's a show. It's all been happening and now you want to know. But before we can start, we must begin with hello. My name is Sean, your host and fellow. Now grab hold of your beverage, your mind just as quick. We're building up for our best sip. So join me now for the greatest pleasure, where we unwind this world together. It's time now. It's time for the sip. Let's do it now. Let's do it quick. Go! Oh, yes, absolutely wonderful. Well, in Luleå in Sweden, the town is divided after mysterious nighttime howling turns out to be the mayor's emotional support husky. Residents of a quiet neighborhood in northern Sweden spent weeks reporting that what many believed was a wolf roaming the outskirts of the town before authorities discovered the source was the mayor's husky reacting dramatically to loneliness. The incident began during the winter after multiple residents reported hearing long mournful howls echoing through the town between midnight and 3 a.m. According to local accounts, pets became agitated, several people claimed they saw large shadows near the tree lines, and community groups began sharing theories about wolves moving closer to residential areas. One resident told local media, "It sounded ancient, like nature itself was grieving." As reports increased, municipal officials launched a response including wildlife experts, late-night patrols, thermal imaging equipment, and public safety advisories warning residents not to approach unknown animals. The situation escalated after blurry cell phone footage circulated online, allegedly showing a large predator near the playground. The footage was later revealed to show a recycling bin, a snowdrift, and poor camera focus. Despite this, fear spread quickly. Some residents reportedly stopped walking outside after dark, while others began carrying whistles or hiking poles just in case. Then investigators made an unexpected discovery. The howling originated from a husky belonging to the town's mayor. According to officials, the dog had recently developed separation anxiety after changes to the mayor's work schedule. Each night, the animal reportedly sat near a rear-facing window and unleashed prolonged theatrical howls that echoed across the frozen landscape. Neighbors described the sound as disturbingly majestic, emotionally devastating, and way louder than a normal dog. The mayor later admitted the dog was very expressive. Public reaction immediately split into two factions. Some residents were furious over the unnecessary panic and public expense, and others defended the dog, arguing that the entire situation had become unintentionally beautiful. The husky itself became locally famous after recordings spread online. Several people began requesting updates about the animal, while one cafe reportedly introduced a limited hot chocolate called the Midnight Wolf. Wildlife experts confirmed there had never been any evidence of actual wolf in the area. The dog continued to live with the mayor, and residents say that the howling still occurs occasionally, though many now describe it as less frightening and more as part of the town's atmosphere. So no doubt the wolf in dog's clothing had you howling with that one. Over in the US, there's been some local election news from yesterday, and Thomas Massie was ousted in the Kentucky congressional by a fair margin. Cal Rain beating Massie 55-45. Massie has always been a counter-voice to the GOP, but has been causing quite a stir recently, especially with his vote against the Big Beautiful Bill. And I probably generally take Scott's view on Massie. He's good that he's there or was there to be a counterbalance to the other voices. There's nothing wrong with having someone say something different. It just provides a richer discussion and more viewpoints. In fact, it can be quite bad if everyone starts saying the same thing, afraid of just saying the wrong thing. It starts ending up in echo chambers. The main problem with Massie is not actually Massie's fault. It's the GOP, I think. Specifically that they've been so reticent to actually make the Republicans successful during Trump's term. If they had more seats, then Massey's seat would not be so critical. If you were 20 over, you wouldn't need Massey's vote. This wouldn't even be a discussion point. It's because the margins are so thin that this is an issue, and it's not the fault of any individual representative. It's just that they've become a problem now because now you have a number dependency on the votes, and that vote becomes more powerful. Massey's track record is around 85% of the votes, in line with the party, which is actually one of the worst, votes voting for on the Republican side for voting with your party. It's because margins are so thin that this is an issue, and mostly that's from Massey's track record is around 85% of the vote with the party, and one of the highest or one of the worst voting with the party on record. That's mostly been on spending, as with the big beautiful bill, which should still be a huge concern for everybody. Their debt isn't going anywhere. So, but also the Iran war resolution to try and restrict the actions of the president. That's not going to have helped. Ultimately, you don't want a president that can't fulfill an agenda, though, and especially when there's still a lot of change going on and still a lot of change that needs to go through. In this case, though, people want change, and that change is going to be more difficult to deliver if you can't get the change through because you don't have the votes. Razor thin margins make this a much more likely outcome in that regard. So, even though it's a bit painful, to the breadth of the conversation, and the breadth of the conversation diminishes, and it's it doesn't mean the problem that Massey was fighting for goes away. It's still there. Mainly the spending and the debt, which is one of the things that Scott liked about Massey. He was one of the only ones concerned about the debt. And as Scott would often say, that debt is going to kill the country. It doesn't seem to be going down at the moment, even now with all the tariffs and things. In this past year alone, it's gone up 2.7 trillion, which makes it just short of 40 trillion at the moment. And that's like a 7% increase in a year, or 125% of GDP, which is, sizable. Comparatively, China is at 64% and Russia is at 8%. Obviously, Russia's not as economically active, but it's probably a better position to be in, having that little debt against your books. Well, living on credit will only get you so far. You have to pay it back at some point. I know there's a plan for that, with Kevin Walsh now head of the Fed, and hopefully he can bring rates down a bit. Hopefully he can bring rates down a lot, actually. But that won't be easy for him because inflation is still, looking to be high now. Currently, the energy prices and the potential shocks to supply chains with the war are making that difficult. So, if rates can be negotiated, then Trump can save a huge amount of money on the interest payments. But it's not going to go much to reducing the principal unless you funnel the interest, what would have been the interest payments, to the principal. But it's mainly about keeping the US cash solvent at the moment. So, especially with a large increase in debt overall, that's going to come with higher interest payments. Debt itself isn't always a bad thing. It can enable you to grow and do things that you couldn't do before, but you have to have a way of recovering the debt over the lifetime of that spend. And given Trump's starting point and the amount of industry now coming back into the US, all of that will take money to set up and lubricate the system. So the benefits longer term should speak for themselves, hopefully. But we're not really on that path. Well, we started on that path, but we're not that far along on it at the moment. So, in terms of what this all means for the woke right, as it's been called, the divide is there for the American First woke right movement, and both in politics and on the ground. They do represent a fairly substantial number of people at the moment, and there's essentially no representation for them now. Massey lost by 55 to 45, which in political terms is a great margin for Galrain, but when it's 45% that lost and they subscribe to wholly different philosophies, then that's a lot of people who will feel like they have no voice anymore. Massa didn't just represent his own constituents either. He was a poster child for that whole movement. So, yeah, what do people on the ground do when they feel like there's no representation for them? They start to disengage and they start to find alternatives, both of which are not really going to be great for the midterms and 2028. So, yeah. How can we sort of kind of keep that group on side? Well, prosecutions, I think. Long overdue prosecutions at that. And one of the main grievances of the woke right is that there's been a lack of action on Epstein and all the other seemingly corrupt cases involving politicians and business people. And just for clarity, I just want to say that when people say Epstein, they use that as a catch-all term nowadays. It's it's just a blanket term for all the shitty corruption and from the politicians and the corporates. It's not just about what Epstein did. If they can start to show some justice, and there's a good chance, then there's a good chance that the American wokes will stay on side enough to keep that train running. Those groups who feel disenfranchised are going to band together, though, regardless, and find others who have similar values to them. Then they'll start working more cohesively together to try and, get to their end goals, fulfill their agenda, and that's democracy at work at the end of the day. I doubt they'll have anything organised by midterms, but certainly for 2028, they'll probably have had the time, and mainly planning for a post-Trump era, where it'll probably all be up for grabs again. So, yeah. I also suspect that the demise of the Democrat Party will also play into that too. You may even find the woke right will become the new left. And that will start maybe pulling the remaining people that can be saved from the left into that group. And, what's then left of the left will sort of go down with a sinking ship. Which then sets up the 2028 to be almost entirely about the America First question. So, yeah, overall, while this is a defeat for America First, it is a win for the country as a whole, I'd say. It does mean that there will be less excuses about votes being too tight or too difficult, and there'll be less jostling about getting deals through. If anything, there should be more change in the last 2 years than the first two if this trajectory holds. Change is what people really wanted from Trump when they voted him in, and this now gives him more power to do that. So, yeah, we'll have to see on that one. Meanwhile, Scott Presler, otherwise known as the Persistence, has won his election in Beaver County in Pennsylvania. He's been a fairly relentless campaigner for other people, really living up to his namesake. Most obviously was the 2024 election when he campaigned quite hard to get Trump elected. It was down to about 150 votes from him in the end, but he made it, and now officially he has crossed the divide. So I think he'll do just fine. He works very hard, and any administration that does that and means well, probably be ahead of many of the others out there. So yeah, well done to Scott. I remember how fond Scott Adams was of his work, and that just gives him some automatic respect in my books. In other areas, the Kentucky Senate race, Mitch McConnell's seat is up for grabs as he's retiring. So Andy Barr won quite comfortably against Daniel Cameron from the GOP side. And Charles Booker beat Amy McGrath on the Democrat side. In Georgia, it was Keisha Lance Bottoms won outright on the Dem side. And Burt Jones and Rick Jackson are headed for a runoff as they didn't reach the 50% requirement. In Pennsylvania, the governor race was Josh Shapiro and Stacey Griffin guarantee advance. And House Democrats Janelle Stelson and Bob Harvey won their nominations. In Idaho, Brad Little won his renomination for governor, and Jim Rich easily winning the U.S. Senate nomination. Over in Oregon, the governor race, Tina Kotek was a major win for the Democrat nomination there, and Christine Drazan winning on the Republican side. Over in Alabama, it was the governor race again, Tommy Tuberville on the Republican nomination, and Doug Jones on the Democrat side advanced quite easily. But in the Senate race, it was undecided and headed for a runoff by the looks of things. Then we got Texas next week on the 26th, and then a week after that, on the June 2nd, will be quite a busy day with a number of other states voting, including California, Iowa, Montana, New Jersey, and several others. Spencer Pratt's hotly contested mayoral race against Karen Bass will be decided then too, which could provide a decisive change for Los Angeles. He released a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air video recently, and that was pretty hilarious. Well worth the watch. But yeah, there's plenty more to come in the next few weeks by the looks of things. Meanwhile, over RFK Jr., it explains how the US military has slashed food costs while making meals healthier. RFK has championed the Make America Healthy Again movement, and he's in charge of the Food and Drug Administration at present. And he's been looking at ways to improve the average diet, and that includes the military. So, yeah, during a wide-ranging interview with Breitbart, Kennedy explained, and I'm just going to read this verbatim, one of the other barriers to changing the dietary culture is that convenience of ultra-processed food has persuaded a lot of people that they don't need to cook at home forever, basically. And so people have forgotten how to cook, and it actually is a lot cheaper to eat good food if you can cook at home. Well, you know, we have a program in the military where we're feeding the troops really high-quality food on 5 bases. We're going to expand that to all the bases now, but the food prior to us getting there, and the guy who was doing it is a famous television chef called Robert Irvin, who used to work for the British Navy. He's doing the menu now for the military. In the military, you know, Peter Hegseth was worried that this was going to break the bank and cost a lot of money to actually feed the troops what they want, but he was going to do it. The cost that the Pentagon allocated was, being spent prior to Chef Irvin getting there, was $18.50 per day per soldier. So that's for 3 meals, $18.50. And they're now feeding them for $10 a day, basically, which is very respectable. And one of the things that Chef Irvin said is, from the beginning, is that they don't need more money, they just need to buy smarter. And if you buy a frozen salmon fillet, it costs $9. If you buy a fresh one, it costs $6. And if you make good choices, you can eat cheaper and you can stay well and stay healthy. So yeah, this story seems like a win. Learning meal prep and cooking is not that difficult, but they're not really skills you always find in schools. Many people have just not learned how to do it, and it's pretty easy once you learn a few things. Having an interest in the quality of your food is one way of living healthier and longer life. It tastes better too. So this seems to be wins all round. And this story does tie in with another one that I heard from South Africa about Peter Groenewald introducing an initiative into the prison system where the prisoners actually bake their own bread. It meant having to refit the kitchens and sort of get all the ingredients and things in and start handling and processing all that themselves. But yeah, it actually saved them a huge amount of money as well, instead of buying the bread from suppliers. And the other extra benefits are obviously that everyone will have fresh, natural, homemade bread every day. And the skills that the inmates are learning will make it very valuable in the real world. So yeah, it seems like there's good opportunity for institutional catering to improve their offerings quite a bit, have healthier, fresher food, and save some money in the process. And yeah, that kind of brings me to the end of my notes. And all I'll finally say is that food is one of the most important things we can put in our body, and learning about what it is and how to cook it can only put you in more control. So it can just be as easy as starting by picking a recipe that you really like and just making it regularly until you master it. That'll give you a good baseline to work from when you branch out into other things. But trying those techniques over and over again starts to make you figure out what's actually going on in the process. And yeah, that is a really excellent way to learn. That's a lot of how I've learned some of the recipes I've done is that way. Just get an idea about how, something that you want to cook, and you just keep on doing it regularly until you get it exactly how you like. So with that, I shall wish you well and say see you later. Cheers.